Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Tim Gray. I'm the Executive Director of Environmental Defense. I'm pleased to welcome you today to the 6th episode of our recovery series, How to Build a Clean Economy. This is a direct follow-up to last week's episode when we looked at some of the myths surrounding clean energy. If you missed it, you can watch that webinar on YouTube or on Facebook called Green Recovery Part 1, What Planet of the Humans Got Wrong? In this series, we're digging deep and answering your most pressing questions on current environmental issues and looking at what solutions can pivot Canada towards a greener, healthier, and more resilient economy that puts people and the planet first. If you don't know us, Environmental Defense is a leading Canadian advocacy organization, and we work with government, industry, and individuals to defend clean water, safe climate, and healthy communities. I'm north of Toronto today, and I would like to acknowledge that I'm here on the traditional, ancestral, and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Algonquin peoples, who are the rightful title holders and stewards of this land, and that Bancroft is covered by the Williams Treaty. Today we are calling in from different locations, and I encourage all of us who are non-Indigenous to learn about the land we are on today. As we start this webinar, let's keep in mind that it is Indigenous people who are disproportionately impacted by pollution, climate change, and environmental justice. So today we have two guest speakers with us, and I'm going to just quickly introduce them. The first is Allie Rougeot of Fridays for the Future here in Toronto, and Keith Brooks, who's the program director at EDC. Both of you say hi.
Hi, everybody.
Hey there.
Thanks for joining us, both of you. Before we get started, I wanted to explain a bit about how we'll be using the webinar software today. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you can see a button called Q&A. Just hit that button and type in your questions, and our team will be able to relay any question you have to me. We often get a large volume of questions, so we won't get to them all, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. Also in today's episode, we'll be asking you, our audience, to take a live action to support the green recovery movement in Canada. We'll be using the chat box button here at the bottom toolbar on Zoom, or you'll be watching later from Facebook or YouTube. There are other ways to take part, so stay tuned toward the end of the webinar for instructions on how we can do that. So let's just set some, set the conditions for the conversation we're going to have today. If you remember back a long time ago, before the current pandemic, there was a huge interest in climate change and huge demand from the public that our governments do something meaningful to change the trajectory of climate change and move towards a much cleaner economy. And as a result, the last federal election largely was a referendum on which party had the most aggressive climate plan. The Liberals won that election, and some of the opposition parties also had very strong commitments. We also know that that was being pushed very hard by the student climate movement around the world, and that we had 1 million people that were participated in climate strikes and climate marches last September across the country. But as we've seen over the last several months, the global pandemic has been distracting us and potentially destabilizing the progress that we're making towards addressing climate change. And right now, we know that our government is facing a huge amount of pressure to bail out big industries, in particular fossil fuel industries. At Environmental Defense Canada, we're being told that behind the scenes, that there is a fight among different views at the federal cabinet table about what we should do coming out of this pandemic, what we should be investing in. Old industries that are causing climate change, or new ones that can help to solve the problem and move us to a more prosperous and equitable future. We know some of these industries that are pushing back in a hard way, specifically plastics and big oil, are using this opportunity to block environmental progress. And in some cases, we have evidence that they're gaining ground. Just a few weeks ago, as you might know from our climate webinar, we published a memo that was leaked to us that had a wide-ranging list of more than 30 demands from the oil and gas lobby. Included on that list, a request to halt all climate policy, a pause implementing on UNDRIP, significant rollback of environmental regulations, and a request to keep all of their lobbying activity that they were doing in Ottawa secret from the Canadian public. So we need a huge movement to push back against this. We cannot just sit back while big industry tries to push us in an even more destructive direction. We know people care. Thousands have signed petition, joined our webinars, and organizing and protests are continuing online. The action on the screen is just one of the ways we've been pushing back at the demands from the oil and gas industry. The environmental movement is not going away. People are ready for bold action on climate before COVID hit. And in the wake of this crisis, people are asking and anticipating how we can build back better. But we do need to figure out how to adapt to the new times to be effective as we keep pushing for change. How can we still push for what we want? Today, with Allie and Keith, we will talk about the what and the how. What kind of green recovery are we asking for? And how is green stimulus working in Canada and abroad? And just as importantly, how can we regain ground as a movement? How can we adapt and rebuild our movement to make a green recovery the only choice for our politicians moving forward? So now it's time to get serious about how we, as engaged citizens and residents, make this a reality. Keith and Allie are going to talk through some of the ways in which we're continuing to push for change, even in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. So let's get started. So we're going to start with Keith. Keith Brooks is the Program Director of Environmental Defense, which means he works directly with all of our campaigns. Keith worked for a number of years in the environmental consulting field before earning a Master's in Environmental Studies. The move from scientist and consultant to advocate was provoked by the recognition that more science cannot solve the environmental challenge on its own. Our challenge lies not in knowing what must be done, but in doing it. That led to his role here at Environmental Defense, and today he's going to talk about how we can ensure that we come out of this moment of crisis and change with a more resilient and sustainable Canada. Over to you, Keith, and I see you've got your hair under control today, so that's great.
I'm working on it for sure. Thanks, Tim. I'm just going to bring up my slides here. So I'm going to talk briefly summarize what it is that we want from a green recovery. I'm going to talk a little bit about why green recovery makes sense, and then I'm going to talk about how we can push for one. And then I'm going to pass it over to Allie, who's going to talk about what Fridays for the Future is doing also to push for a green recovery and for continued action on climate change. If you've been following the series, you've already heard a lot of these ideas. They're not new. They're up in a blog that we have, and there are a lot of things that a lot of groups are pushing for right now. But I'm going to go through them all anyway so that you understand what a green recovery might look like for Canada. One of the key things that we need is some money to help stimulate more retrofits for buildings. Retrofits can reduce energy use, they reduce pollution, and they create jobs that are necessarily local. If buildings use a lot of energy for heating and for cooling, if we make our buildings more energy efficient, we reduce the energy, but also we create jobs that are local because the buildings are where the buildings are, they can't be moved. Another nice piece about buildings as part of a stimulus package is that we've had a lot of retrofit programs here in Canada in the past. We've had them at the national level in many of the provinces. So there's a lot of programs that are kind of on the shelf that are ready to go. It wouldn't be very difficult to get something up and running as part of a stimulus package. It puts the construction industry to work. We have the workers ready to go. We got the buildings in place. It should be a pretty simple piece. We need more clean transportation. I mean, this means support for electric vehicle charging. We don't have enough charging deployed across this country, and that's one of the impediments to getting people into clean vehicles. We need support for electric buses. That would make a big impact in urban centers, and it would also stimulate jobs here in Canada because we actually do build a number of electric buses here in this country. We also need a zero emissions vehicle mandate, or a ZEV mandate. That's a policy to require that manufacturers and dealers sell a certain percent of non-emitting or low-emitting cars. Our friends at the Pembina Institute looked at what are one of the ways that we can stimulate more green manufacturing in Canada, more electric vehicle manufacturing, and the best way is by stimulating more demand for electric cars. And the surest way to do that is to put in place what's called the ZEV mandate, to require that people sell more electric vehicles. We also shouldn't be forgetting about our existing transit networks and some of the projects that we had in the works before, like LRT projects. There's many LRT projects planned across this country. Those are clean projects. They're public transit projects. People are going to get back on public transit. We know it's a little bit different right now, but I don't think public transit's going away. We need those clean options available for people who don't want to take who can't take a car or they don't want to take a car. We're still going to need public transit, and we need it to be clean. And that also means cleaning up existing transit networks like the GO Rail network here in Toronto, right? The government has been promising to electrify the GO Rail network. It runs on diesel right now. They've been talking about electrifying it for a long time. It's on the books. It's part of every transit plan here in the city. We need to get moving forward on that. It would clean the cities up. It would create jobs. It would reduce emissions. It should be part of this too. And it's already on the books. It's already been planned out. We know how to do it. Another big important piece is clean energy. I mean, if you tuned into the webinar last week, you know that the attacks on clean energy are not well founded. You know that clean energy is the cheapest form of new electricity generation in many parts of the world, including here in Canada. Wind energy is the cheapest form of new power here in Ontario. I mean, clean energy is setting records in Alberta. We need more clean energy. It's got to be part of the stimulus. One of the areas that the federal government could focus is on the interties, the connections between provincial electricity grids, so that some of the provinces that still rely on fossil fuels can access clean energy that isn't in abundance in some other provinces. And it also would make our grid more resilient and more stable and better able to handle even more renewable power. Another important area to focus would be geothermal energy, particularly in Alberta. Alberta's got a rich geothermal resource, and you could tap that resource for clean power, for renewable power, for electricity or for heat by using the same drills and the same crews and the same machinery that they're using to drill for oil and gas right now. So geothermal energy is a particular resource that's promising for Alberta, and we know that Alberta is struggling with the oil industry right now and in need of a transition. Geothermal should be part of that for sure. We cannot turn our backs on the commitment to move towards a circular economy. We know the plastics industry is saying now, in the light of this pandemic, that we need even more single-use plastic, but that can't be the case. We need to hold the government to account to ban single-use plastics as they had promised, to move towards extended producer responsibility, which holds producers responsible for the garbage that they create and boosts recycling targets and gets us to zero plastic waste. That's what we need to do. And we know this would be good for our economy. There was a report done for the federal government that showed that we're literally throwing away billions of dollars of valuable materials every year. We're just using it, chucking it in the landfill. If we capture those materials, we capture those billions of dollars of value, and we create a lot of jobs. We have recycling industries here in Canada that could be built up if we invest in them, if we require them to recycle more material. And we also know that recycling and reuse create way more jobs than landfilling. Landfilling is very inefficient from our economic perspective, doesn't employ a lot of people. A circular economy would employ a lot more, be a lot better for our economy. We need to be investing more in nature and in the Great Lakes. The federal government had a commitment to plant 2 billion trees. That is moving a little bit slowly, and they need to get going on it. That was actually going to put a lot of people to work, actually planting those trees and growing those trees. And it's going to suck up a lot of carbon from our atmosphere, and it's going to help make our country better, help make our forests more beautiful, give us more habitat for species. It needs to be part of the recovery. And also, we should be investing more in fresh water and in the Great Lakes. Canada is home to 20% of the world's supply of surface fresh water, a whole 1/5 of it, and we don't invest nearly enough in protecting it. One of the interesting stories, which you'll hear more about next week from my colleague Kelsey, is about how investing in fresh water and in the lakes can also help our economy and create jobs. So out of the 2008-2009 financial crisis, the United States created a program called the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. It's billions of dollars funding shoreline restoration projects and cleanups and whatnot. This improved local communities in and around the lakes, and it boosted their economies and created jobs in tourism and in a bunch of other industries there, and the fishing and other things as well. So all told, actually, from that program, the 2008-09 US program, for every single dollar invested by the US federal government, $3 were returned to the economy. So this isn't just about an environmental initiative, this is also a good economic initiative, should be part of our recovery. And finally, as Tim mentioned, we cannot be giving handouts to big polluters. We know they're in there with their hands out. We know they're asking for, millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars in economic stimulus to boost these old industries. We need to say no. This is an opportunity for us to actually advance our transition, not to go backward. But we are concerned because economic crises like we've had in the past have often set back the environmental agenda, have set back the climate change agenda. This is an instance where we cannot be setting that back, and that means we should not be bailing out big polluters. We need to be investing in new clean industries. A green recovery makes sense. The economics of environmental and climate initiatives have changed so fundamentally that it makes sense from an economic perspective. And if you don't want to take it from me, that's fine. But here's Forbes magazine, hardly a green publication, very economic focused. And the authors here, this is the editor's pick, saying renewable energy is the only way forward. It's the only way forward. We need to go clean because we see that there's low cost in there. We see there's jobs in there. We can have energy security. We can have all these good things if we move towards more renewable energy. Here's another, this is from The Economist magazine. Again, right, a global publication focused on the economy. This was their cartoon just from a couple of weeks ago. And the point they're making here is that climate change isn't going away. We can't, we need to put everything into fighting this coronavirus, but the threat of climate change still looms, needs to be attacked. And climate change has been called, the largest threat to the global economy by the World Economic Forum, by the OECD, by all of these, major financial players. And that hasn't changed. COVID has not changed that. We still need to deal with climate change. And so that's why green recovery makes sense and can't set us back. Green recovery also makes sense because it's a better recovery. It's better stimulus. There was a massive study done by academics in the United States and in Europe looking at stimulus projects from the 2008 financial crisis. They looked at 700 different projects as they surveyed all these experts, and they came to a conclusion that green stimulus projects create more jobs, deliver higher short-term returns per dollar spent. They lead to increased long-term savings for the government, and they're just better than traditional stimulus projects. So what's really interesting about this report is that this was not done by environmentalists. This wasn't done by environmental economists. This was done by mainstream economists, central bankers, the kind of people that would have had a bias, if anything, to say, we should, if we have to put environmental initiatives on hold to save our economy, then that's justified. That would have been their thinking going into this. They looked at it though, and they said, whoa, a green recovery is a better recovery. They found that, in fact, there is no conflict between environment and economy. Investing in the economy, in the environment rather, is the best way to stimulate our economy. Good news is that green recovery is a live issue, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And France and Germany have huge green recovery plans that they're working on. And in fact, all of Europe is trying to bring a green recovery package out. This is being championed by the President of the European Union. It's a massive stimulus program that's aimed to boost Europe's efforts to get to zero emissions by 2050, which is their target as is ours. And they're talking about massive investments. 60 billion euros to boost electric vehicle sales in Europe. 91 billion euros in grants and guarantees for energy retrofits. 10 billion euros for renewable energy projects over the next 2 years. 10 billion euros to boost renewables and to boost hydrogen power across the European Union. Massive, massive projects, massive investment to really advance Europe's efforts to get to zero emissions, not to take it backwards. More good news is that we're talking about a green recovery here in Canada. This is a live issue in Ottawa. There's a lot of folks that are saying the same things that we're saying and that you're supporting. We need a just recovery. We need a green recovery. This was an article that was in the Globe just the other day that kind of outlined a bunch of the thinking in Ottawa and a bunch of the groups who are pushing for green recovery. There was a new task force that was launched that you may have seen with some solid economic recommendations about a green recovery. But it's not a done deal in Canada, and we still need to push on this. But the good news is that there is an opportunity. This is a conversation we need to insert ourselves into it and be part of it. More good news, as Tim already shared, the public is supportive of this. In fact, they're more supportive now of interventions to transform our economy and our society in this pandemic than they were even before. We had support before, we had a climate change election, we have even greater support now. So we need to bring it. So here we come to the how. This is where you come in. We need you to get involved. If we want this green recovery to happen, we need to push for it. We need to be visible. We need to be seen and heard. And I know we can't get out on the streets like we did before, but we can do lots of things from our homes. We can do lots of things while we're being safe. Most important thing is that your elected officials need to hear from you. Your members of parliament that you elected that are in Ottawa to represent your interests, they need to hear from you that you want a green recovery. And so there's things you can do. You can sign the petition that Tim showed, and we'll give you a link to that petition as well. You can do things like you can call your MP. They have a phone number, they have a constituency office. You can pick up your phone and call them. And if they're not there, you can leave a message. You can request to meet with them. I mean, maybe you're not going to meet in person. Maybe you're going to meet over Zoom. Maybe you're going to meet some other way, but you can request to meet with them to make your desires known. You can write a letter to the editor as well for your local paper. If you see an article about climate change, about a green recovery, about big oil pushing for big handouts, you can write an LTE, a letter to the editor, and tell them what you want. Share your opinion with the media and with anybody that's consuming that. There's other things you can do. Get creative. I don't have all the ideas. I'm sure you guys have lots of great ideas, but get creative. Do something in your community and get organized with your friends and your neighbors. Connect with people over Facebook. Connect with people in your community. People are coming together. And you can come together to push for a green recovery in your community and get organized. And in general, get connected to the environmental movement. I know you're here tuned in today. You can get connected with the environmental defense in more detail, with Fridays for the Future, with tons of great organizations, all of whom will give you lots of opportunities to get involved and to help us all push for the green recovery that we want and need. And so we actually have one action that you can take right now. And if you go to your chat, the chat box there, I'll just show you. It should be at the bottom of your screen. We've popped a link in there, and you can go to that link, and you can cut and paste or click through and post something to Twitter or post something to Facebook to say that you want a green recovery. So here we have a tweet aimed at our finance minister, the Honorable Bill Morneau, is just to say, I want Canada to build back with a sustainable and resilient economy. We can do it if we put people before big polluters. If you go into the chat, it should be right there. You can cut and paste, click it through. There are, looks like over 300 people are on this webinar right now. So if we all do it, even if half of us do it, if we send 150 tweets to Bill Morneau right now, that'd be pretty amazing. And if you don't have Facebook, or Twitter rather, share something on Facebook. That's fine too. Sign the petition, share it with your friends, tell them what you're doing. And if you don't have Facebook or Twitter, that's also fine. Like I said, there's lots of other opportunities we have for you to get engaged, for you to take action. There are all these things that I outlined right here, and you are going to get an email from us to give you opportunities to do engagement down the road. These are just some examples, but what I want you to do is be looking out for that email. Open that email when it comes and take the action that we suggest in that email, and then be prepared to do more and more and more things, because we're not going to get a green recovery if we don't push for it. Okay, that's it for me. So I will stop the share here and hand it back to Tim.
Thanks so much, Keith. For those who are just joining us, we've heard from Keith Brooks, the program director here at Environmental Defense, who walked through what a green recovery means and how we can keep pushing for it. And next, we're going to speak with Allie. Allie is an economics and public policy student at the University of Toronto. She has been an environmental and human rights activist since the age of 10. And she has been passionate about sustainability and climate justice since high school. In January 2019, she took on the role of lead coordinator for the Fridays for the Future movement in Toronto. Allie has been recognized for her work by the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace with the Kim Phuc Youth Award, Toronto Post Magazine 20 Under 20, and corporate nights, 30 under 30. So lots of accolades for someone who's just starting what I'm sure is going to be a really prosperous career making change. Many of you were probably at the climate strike event last year, organized by Fridays for the Future. Today, she's going to talk about how she and her teammates are taking that success and finding ways to build on it, even through physical distancing. Allie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim, and hello, everybody. I'm just going to start sharing my slides before I get started. So, as it was mentioned, my name is Allie, and I am part of Fridays for Future Toronto. You may have heard us in the streets in September, and as you know, the youth climate strikes are based on those huge, massive protests. But I'm going to talk to you today about how and why we need to have this movement continue during COVID, even with social distancing, even with the fact that our traditional ways of organizing were a little bit changed. So I personally love these massive gatherings. I know they create change, and they have created change in Toronto and Canada and in the rest of the world. But I don't know, just looking back at that image, I'm thinking it wouldn't be super popular in the middle of a global pandemic to have a bunch of us, or 60,000 precisely in September, on Queen's Park lawn. So we might have to change strategy on how we demand change. And I'm going to be honest with you, we've also had to change strategy on how we organize as a team, because as youth, we liked to gather in person, and it was really great to get each other's energy, maybe feel potential tensions, brainstorm, and that hasn't been the same through Zoom calls. So we had to change. The one thing that we've kept in mind the whole time is that the problem is still very, very much here. And if anything, this crisis has exposed that our systems are not ready for some catastrophic changes, that we still have a lot of communities that are very easily forgotten, that we have governments that don't put the crisis at the top of their agendas. And so we know that it would be at least important to address the crisis now, the climate crisis. However, we've realized even more that it's actually crucial to do it now, because we have what my public policy professors love to talk about, the window of opportunity. And it's that moment where things are aligning so that we can ask for change. So governments are actually asking for solutions. They're looking at communities, they're looking at innovations. We have a lot of people that are going to need new jobs. We have an economy to completely reboost. And very importantly, and sadly it's not always the case, we actually have the public and our elected officials that know that acting fast and listening to the science can save lives in the future. That was true for COVID, and that's true for climate, and that's kind of a once in a at least generation opportunity. There's also something else that motivates me, and I hope it motivates you to actually act from home. And it's that idea that when we're fighting for a green recovery, we're not just fighting for a good outcome versus a neutral one. I think we're actually fighting for a good outcome versus a really bad one, because post-COVID, we could see big tech companies taking more power, companies having bailouts, racism being more prominent, communities being weakened, and that's not something we want, and that's a terrible outcome. So we have to be stronger and more efficient in our organizing than those other people, because if I see the window of opportunity, they definitely see it too. So it's also a question of how fast we act and how efficient we are. All right, so that always kind of scares me, but I want to share with you what the youth, especially in the GTA and across Canada, are doing, and hopefully this inspires you to take some action and to organize yourself in this way. We've had, I guess, 3 pillars in the way we organized. And the first one was using this time to restructure and deepen our network. We were doing what is called apparently emergency organizing, which means, we were just going to the next strike and to the next big thing. And that was great because we had momentum, and it worked because we had momentum. But COVID really came and killed our momentum, and that's okay, because it's actually giving us the chance to think, okay, we need something that's more resilient. We need something that will actually keep building. So we know that we're going to have in-person strikes again. We're sure of that, but we're not sure when. We're actually hoping for winter 2021, but once again, we'll only do it when we know it's safe to do it and when public health officials tell us it's safe to do it. So in the meantime, we've actually started creating on each university and college campus. For now, it's on Ontario, but Quebec's already done it, and the rest of Canada is starting to do it as well. Some mobilization squads, mob squads, which are people from that university who are going to be mobilizing their student unions, hopefully their faculty as well, and social justice groups on campus, so that the next time we declare a big strike, we don't have, the 200, one of our organizers calls them the 200 hippies already motivated. No, we have the 20,000 students that understand why strikes matter. And for that, we need an ongoing relationship with all those student groups. And it's becoming really powerful because peers are mobilizing their peers on each campus, at Ryerson, at York. So that's extremely powerful. And if I was as an elected official right now, I would probably pass the Green Recovery bill or motion before we get to striking. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really loud in the streets. Our second pillar has been continuing to educate ourselves, because the climate crisis is more complex than just, a very apparent linear situation. And so we try to educate ourselves and the people that are already supporting us. I call us a gateway movement, in the sense that you come in because you should care about the climate crisis, and you come out understanding why a really comprehensive policy package is important. And to do that, we've been doing weekly climate strikes that are live on YouTube. And we have guests, so experts or people that are fighting in their community, to explain the ties between climate change and biodiversity, climate and labor, Indigenous sovereignty and climate. And so we're just kind of having this ongoing work to keep building it. And then our third pillar has been mostly led by some of our younger activists, so the teenagers, the high schoolers, and it's been keeping our community so alive through really good social media campaigns. So Instagram, TikTok are used a lot, but Facebook and Twitter as well. And movie nights that we have, where we screen climate justice and environmental movies. And the point is that we know we're competing with other narratives out there. We know that while people are social distancing and they're looking at movies and content, we want to make sure the idea of togetherness, hope, urgency, community are still the first thing people see, instead of other forms of media that could be encouraging individuality, apathy, and things we don't want. So these have been our 3 pillars. There are some things, however, that we know haven't changed. And we're trying to be especially careful not to look too much on ourselves as individuals. We want to continue this system change. And I say that because when I started this social distancing, I started really, really introspecting. I even told myself, should I try to do a zero waste COVID situation? Should I just try to, because I'm living at home and alone and I can probably do it. And then I realized, while I'm taking all these efforts, and they're important efforts, and if you're able to do it, congratulations. But while I was wasting so much time looking at being the perfect citizen, I realized, who isn't? The fossil fuel and the plastic industry. They're not trying to be perfect citizens. They're trying to get to have Zooms with the prime minister and the ministers. They're trying to fill that void that we're leaving because we're no longer in the streets. And so we can't let that happen. We can't let that void be there. And just like we literally reclaimed the streets, we went back there, we took some space there, we have to take some space digitally in this digital political conversation. And Keith mentioned it before, but I can't stress enough how important it is that you do it, because it actually really matters. And the interesting thing is, you don't have to be an expert on any of these things. So I really want to say, your goal by the end of the social distancing should be that your MP, your MPP, maybe the prime minister, the CEO of whoever you bank with, know your name and know that you're fighting right now for a green recovery. And you don't really have to know everything. You just have to say, well, I've heard of this green recovery. I know that we have to retrofit. You can use what Keith talked about. You give a few examples and you say, what are you doing about it? And that's just really powerful. That puts pressure. So I know you're obviously going to do that, but then you're going to have your second step. What do I do? How do I get involved? If you consider yourself youth, we really want you to join us. So you can use, and there's a few email addresses and websites on here. Any way works to get in touch with us. We do onboardings, we do trainings. We require zero experience in organizing. So if you're from the GTA, just contact us and we will get you connected with our team and we can start organizing together. If you're not from the GTA, that's okay, because we have a network across SoCal, Canada. And if you message us, if you message me especially, the second email is my email, I'll get you in touch with organizers in your city, because we have organizers practically everywhere. And the last thing I want to say is, if you are an adult supporter, we really, really welcome your help. We won't necessarily have you in our meetings, in our day-to-day organizing, but we have lists of volunteers. So on our website, you can sign up. And we also need you to join the groups led by adults. There's a lot of them in Toronto 350, Climate Fast. If you don't have time, but you have a bit of money, donate. When you donate to groups like Environmental Defense, like David Suzuki Foundation, they actually help us after. They help us, they train us, they help us. So that's how you can actually help us directly during this time. And the last thought I want to leave you with, apart from this picture from November, is that we are not the virus. And that's not a fair thing to say. And that's not an okay thing to say, because it makes it seem like we can't be part of the solution. We can actually tackle two crises at once. I find that amazing. I found that extremely motivating. And I hope you do too. And I hope what you heard today gives you just that motivation to, when you're at home, and especially if you have the capacity, the headspace, the time to do those actions, to get out there and be loud, even from your couch or your kitchen. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Allie. You just shared some of how Fridays for the Future are keeping the momentum going, even through this time of crisis. And I hope you have found some inspiration to do more in your own community. Next, we're going to turn to questions from all of you in the audience. But just a couple for me before we do that, it just came to mind. One for Keith. This comes up a lot. Is what are the consequences if we don't move towards a green or a clean recovery for the Canadian economy and for Canadian workers? You explained just the massive shift to a cleaner investments that are occurring in the European Union. What's the consequences if we do just take the advice of the fossil fuel industry and double down on more oil and gas and plastic? Well, any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't think it'd be a good outcome for Canada. The fossil fuel industry was on the ropes before this crisis hit. And I mean, most recently because of other countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia flooding the market with oil and driving prices down. But, fossil fuels have been in decline in terms of their prices in Canada for a long time, though Canada's actually producing more oil than ever before. We're getting less returns to our governments. We're paying less royalties. There's fewer jobs. Oil is just not delivering the economic benefits that maybe it once did for Canada. And so doubling down on that is just throwing, more money into a dying industry. It's flogging a dead horse. Why are we going to just be, when we've already spent billions of dollars on the pipeline, we've already spent billions of dollars bailing out these companies in the past. I don't think giving them any more money makes sense. And what those academics found is that the green recovery things are better, right? They create more jobs, they're better for us. So yeah, we're not going to recover as strongly, and we're going to continue to place bets on a dying industry. It's a mistake. And with plastic too, I mean, Canada, we need to make sure that Canada moves forward to ban plastic, but this is also a global thing that's happening, right? Europe, we're again following Europe's lead on the plastics ban. And other places in the petrochemical and oil and gas industry are really hoping, they're banking on plastics as, the future industry that's going to sop up demand for oil because we don't want it anymore because of climate change and because of our clean energy options. And so they're hoping that that's going to happen. But plastics, we need to reduce the amount of plastics that have been produced. Plastics is not going to go away as an issue because we're going to continue to find more stories of plastic, filling up, whales that wash up dead on beaches, and plastic being found everywhere that scientists look, and we're going to take action on plastic. So again, this is an industry that, like fossil fuels, has to decline. Betting on that now would be a bad bet, in my view.
Thanks. Allie, for you, I mean, we've seen during this health crisis that the government can act fairly decisively. Quite often we hear that government can't do anything. It all has to be done by the private sector. There's no place for regulation. And the government can act, but also that people can work together to address something that's critical and moving very quickly. What can we learn from that about the climate crisis?
I think that's one of the first questions I asked myself was, how come we have leaders that sometimes didn't take leadership for a while and all of a sudden were able to answer to a crisis? Like, that's what I try to do every day, getting them to answer to a crisis. And some of my lessons were that, well, you have to have a crisis that clearly affects those who vote for them. And that was maybe a little gloomy at first, because I thought usually it's not the youth that vote for example, Doug Ford that we have in Ontario. But then I realized that means we just have to get others, those voters, to show that they care, right? And I realized that it's also when there's this clear idea that the crisis is there and that government action is the only thing that gets us there. If at the beginning of COVID we had said, we just hope everybody stays home and we don't put any restrictions, pretty sure most of the public would have said, yeah, that's not going to work, right? So if we had that same level of comprehension and kind of public pressure, going back to public pressure, I think that's what we really learned, is that it works.
Yeah, so governments don't so much lead as respond to the leadership that's coming from the public. And I think that really underscores the need for us working together and organizing together to demand action. I'm going to switch now to some questions from our audience because we have a lot of them coming in. And I'm going to start with one here for Ellie, and it's from Eva. It says, many organizations are calling for a just recovery, which includes not just environmental and climate change action, but protecting public services and ensuring that no one is left behind. How do we advance both of these? How do we ensure coordination between just recovery and green recovery campaigns to avoid confusion and ensure politicians can't play a one off each other? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad, Eva, you brought up the just recovery, because that's something that the youth climate strikers are going to be part of, and there's going to be a release soon where you should see our names on their organizations. The just recovery is taking the green recovery and adding it to other things, like the fact that we need to reduce those inequalities. We need to be an anti-racist fight at the same time as a climate justice fight. I'm pretty sure those ideas completely align. I'm really happy that the environmental movement has, for the past decade, taken a really strong justice lens and hasn't just focused on only the environment, because we understood it was all interconnected. So I want to see how in the next few days, when the campaign launches, you feel about the groups that have joined already. But it's an ongoing conversation, and we're kind of hoping to also get our supporters there by doing the education I mentioned. So we're introducing slowly, like, why are we including unions so much in our fight? But yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned it. Great opportunity for me to plug in that's coming soon, and we're a big part of it for sure.
Well, I'll just add to that. I'll just add that environmental defense is also going to be part of the just recovery efforts, and I think most of the major environmental groups are also aligned with that as well. So there totally is a connection already there. It's strong, and we're all pushing in the same direction. It's great to see.
I have a couple or several questions have come in about nuclear power, and people are asking about small modular reactors as the way forward to solve the energy crisis so that we can get off fossil fuels. Maybe this one for Keith. Is this the way forward? Do we have the magic bullet from small modular nuclear reactors to replace fossil fuels?
No, I don't think we do. I mean, the reality is that this is an unproven technology. There's maybe a couple of prototypes that are out there. They haven't even decided or chosen like what's the best way to build one of these reactors. It's not ready for prime time at all. And in fact, it's at least 10 years, if not 20 years out from a technological perspective before these things could be deployed. And then there's the cost. It's very unlikely that this is going to be cheaper than like wind or solar power. We already have cheap renewable energy. We have the price for renewables have come down so dramatically that it has shocked everybody that follows these trends. Everybody's predicted it wrong because it's come down much, much faster than anybody thought. And so, if we want low carbon electricity, we should be investing in proven technology that we can actually get off the shelf that is working around the world already, and we just need more of it. We need to add some energy storage to that, but there's super exciting things happening there as well. And I think that would be a better place. I mean, we can invest in batteries rather than in nuclear power. Like it's high cost, it's risky, it's a long way out before it could ever become commercialized. And I think betting on remember we need to reduce our emissions to zero by 2050. If we're going to bank on a technology that isn't even going to be ready for at least 10 years, if not more, then we're losing a lot of time. It's too far out in the future, too risky.
Thanks. And the next one here that I think is good. Oh, it's another nuclear question. So I'm not going to answer that one because we've already addressed it. Oh, here's a good one. Maybe for Ali. When people are going to be contacting their elected officials, what would you say is more effective at this time? People talking to their MP or to their provincial MPP? Where are you encouraging people to talk at this point?
Actually, that's a great
Or
question.
both.
Yeah, I mean, both is always a good answer, but let's say you want to test out the first one and see. There's a few things I would say. First of all, knowing if the person you're contacting has a big role as in a ministry or in a committee that's working on the health crisis, maybe know that they might not have the best bandwidth right now, but there's a lot of ministers and MPs that are not on these task force or whatever and that have the time. So if you have a bit of time to look into that, you might have someone that's more open to hearing your ideas. But then also, it's also, I personally believe a lot in the local. So I love to contact first city officials, also because I find the conversation to be more easy for me to talk about what I would like to see in my city. And then when you gain that confidence about talking to your city official, then you can kind of go, and I would say to either level. But it's true that I'm there's going to be a stimulus package that's probably going to come from the federal level most. So I would be inclined to push more at the federal level. And it's depending on where you are provincially. You might also know that there's some words that might just get you hung up on at some point, right? In Ontario, I try not to mention climate too much when I call. So yeah, you might also kind of have your tactical there. But I would say practice with something you're comfortable speaking with. So municipal maybe, and then federal seems like a good bet right now, given what we need to see.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the federal government controlling large amounts of money, a lot of the investment decisions that they're going to be making are controlled by the federal government in the coming months. Here's a question for Keith. This is from Celia. Can you discuss briefly the importance of government procurement, so government purchasing and helping us move towards a clean economy?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely important, right? I mean, government is the largest spender in our economy. They're buying all kinds of things and building all kinds of infrastructure. And they're buying transportation, public transportation vehicles, all kinds of things like that. And have a very powerful player is in the economy. There's a push happening in the United States around green procurement, around low carbon procurement, around a buy clean campaign to say, because we shouldn't just buy American in the States. They're saying we should be buying clean, and that clean may also be Canadian. And the same thing is true in Canada, and it's even true for things like concrete and steel. Strangely enough, that we produce lower carbon steel here in Canada than if we get our steel from other parts of the world. And I think We know that domestic procurement, buying things locally, is good for us. It reduces the amount of shipping that goes into it. But also, if we have a clean electricity grid, and that means that the manufacture of those things are cleaner, we can also control the emissions from those things better, so they're not impacting local communities. It's powerful, and it's important, and it would be good for us economically speaking. And I think we're going to hear a lot more about green procurement from governments as we go forward as part of this stimulus package. We need the government to. There's a lot of Canadian technology and innovations that nobody in Canada will buy, including the Canadian government, and that's a real shame. If other governments, other countries are testing Canadian innovation, then we're missing something here. So I think it's really important. I'm glad you brought that up.
Thanks. One of the things that I've heard sometimes, especially older people say, is about the Fridays for the Future movement and stuff, is that it's just young people, and young people are always idealistic, and they don't really understand how the world works, and they'll get older and just want to buy a big gas guzzling SUV. What do you have to say about that, and how is what's going on with young people fundamentally different in some ways than some of the movements we've seen in the past, and what is driving the level of commitment to that?
And there's so much to say about, but that's a comment we get a lot. One thing is, I love it when they tell us what you're asking for is politically impossible. And I tell them, I just went to school for many years learning about science, and what I'm seeing is it's scientifically impossible not to do it. So, I'll rather take my bet on a politically impossible one than on a scientifically impossible one. That's, the thing that keeps driving me. But there's a lot of other reasons. First of all, we're not the first generation to ask for change. We might be the first one to ask it so loudly, so massively, but we come after it, and we're walking in the steps of people that have been asking this for a long time. And I think the reason we keep pushing it, and I don't think we're idealistic, I think this is, we're just fighting really hard not to be pessimistic. Since we were young, we were bombarded with things around the debt. And I lived in Europe most of my life, and we were told that every country was in debt, that we were going to come out of school with no jobs. Now we're actually being told we're going to be in debt in a recession when I graduate university. Then you add the climate crisis, then we're in a mental health crisis, then we're in a housing crisis. I mean, if we weren't a little optimistic or idealistic, we would all be crying right now. So really, when older folks tell us that, I tell them, look at what we've been given to deal with. Aren't you glad we're taking the more optimistic route compared to anything else?
That's a great answer.
Can I just add in there, Tim, that
Sure.
I think it's so great that the youth are involved and pushing so loudly and with so much strength, so many numbers around the world. It's fantastic, and history does tell us that when the youth get involved in these protest movements and in social movements, that's when real change happens. And we've seen it time and time again. So, and of course you have a right to be asking for a safe and secure future. I mean, that's a completely realistic thing. So I'm really excited. I'm so happy that the youth are speaking up so loudly and so strongly. It's critical to the success of our for us to stop climate change and to have a safe and stable planet to live on.
No, I think that's exactly true. I just have one more content question, then just more of a personal one that I want to ask you both. But one of the things that I hear quite often from people that are skeptical about the ability of government to support change or interfere in the market, as people would say, is they say that subsidizing things like deep energy retrofits or restoration of ecosystems and stuff, that's not a good idea because it's spending government money. And the same thing was discussed around getting solar and wind up to scale, even though now they're very much cost effective. But does that make sense, or is it even necessary for governments to invest in some of these new things at the beginning to actually make them operate at scale? And if you could just speak to the example of the oil sands and the nuclear industry. I mean, those didn't start from as market-driven technologies, government played a huge role in those. And maybe just remind folks a little bit about that and why it's important for some of these new things like geothermal for government to play a role.
Yeah, as you were talking, Tim, I was going to say that there's the small industry in Canada that you might have heard about. It's called the oil sands, and it is the product of. It's probably the most subsidized industry in Canadian history ever, right? Like it was actually a government project that was initiated with government dollars. Created, the company that's Suncor now was Petro-Canada. It was all government money that was pumped into getting the oil sands to be commercially viable from the very beginning. And there has been so much government support for that industry all along, right? Fossil fuel subsidies is a major campaign that we are waging because the federal government, going back more than a decade, has promised to phase out fossil fuel subsidies, but they continue to subsidize them to the tune of over $1 billion in Canada. Plus, there's massive provincial subsidies in Alberta. They've now bought this Trans Mountain pipeline, which is billions more dollars. I mean, it is the most heavily subsidized industry in Canadian history ever, I am sure. And it's still not viable today. So it was for a time. It definitely drove a boom in the West, and most of Canada actually benefited from that economically for a while. Now we know it's left behind massive liabilities that these companies don't have the ability to clean up, and it's going to leave a big debt for taxpayers. But no, your point is so true. It was massively subsidized and would never have happened were it not for government intervention. And the same thing goes for nuclear, right? Those CANDU reactors that we have here in Ontario was an idea that we could build nuclear power in Canada. We can export our technology around the world, all heavily subsidized. Again, it didn't really pan out in terms of us having a market there internationally, but it did create some power here in Canada. There's some problems with nuclear for sure, but the point is that it would ever have happened were it not for the government. And we know that the government is super important when it comes to renewable energy. The two countries that have really helped drive the cost of renewables down is Germany and then China. And that's all through government programs to support renewables, right? I mean, Germany had the Energiewende, like the energy transformation, massive programs to stimulate wind and solar power, and got those technologies to be viable. And then China just said, wow, that's where the future of manufacturing and industry is in that. And they just, doubled down or tripled down on renewables and drove the prices down like crazies to the point now where they're the most cost competitive form of power. And that's all because of government. So it's super important that government gets involved. They're a huge player in the economy. They've got to get playing in this space too, even more than they are already.
Thanks, that's great. And just to wrap up, because we are almost out of time now, just one question for both of you. Keith, you're like kind of mid-career and worked on environmental advocacy for a long time. And Allie, you're, I'd say, just getting started, even though you've been doing stuff for so long because you're still in university. But these are kind of difficult times. I mean, we see more and more evidence of the consequences of climate change and ecosystem erosion, and yet we're both, both of you are, in the midst of trying to address those issues in the middle of a global pandemic. So, what gets you up in the morning and keeps you hopeful that we can succeed? Let's start with you, Keith, just quickly, and then Allie, and then we'll wrap up.
Well, Tim said I get to work with great people like you. That's obviously a big one that gets me up in the morning. But no, I mean, I'm optimistic. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I know that we've solved massive problems in the past around the environment. I know that social movements have made massive change around civil rights, around LGBTQ rights. I mean, around anti-racism. I mean, so many important things have happened, and our world has gotten better. I'd like to see it to continue to get better. I've got kids, so I'm invested in their future. I can't help but do this work, and I'm cautiously optimistic that if we keep at it, we will overcome the challenges that we face, and we'll make our world better.
Thanks. Allie, last word for you.
No pressure. Sometimes I don't wake up super optimistic, and especially during this COVID, it's hard, but there's two things. The first one is this kind of necessity to do it. I am going to be on this planet for a while. Why not invest in my future by doing this kind of work? And the other one is the notion that I hope everybody keeps with them is that every fraction of a degree we avoid, a degree of warming we avoid, matters. And even if I'm not really sure if we can actually get to those Paris targets and things like that, to be honest, I know that if any action we do will reduce just some fraction of the degrees, then there'll be some suffering that's reduced, some forced migration that's avoided, some drought that's avoided. And so that keeps me motivated, that it's not an all or nothing situation, and that every more year that we push for change, we're actually getting somewhere a little better at least.
Thanks so much. And thanks to you both for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation. That is the end of our time. So thank you everyone for joining us today and for all of the thoughtful questions that you forwarded to us. If you haven't yet, you can take the action right now to support a green recovery movement in Canada by checking out the instructions in our chat box right now. If you're watching the video later, you can take action by using the text here on the screen to post on Twitter or share it on Facebook. You can also sign and share our petition directly if you're watching this video later at environmentaldefense.ca/green recovery. We'll also be sending an email tomorrow, Friday, with a link to the petition. I also really want to thank all of you who are environmental defense supporters for joining us today, for sending us your question, but also for all the work you do to help advance a greener and more prosperous Canada. Next week, we're going to be back again with the final episode in our recovery series. We're going to be looking at investing in resilience by exploring the threats and opportunities for our Great Lakes in a post-COVID world. Our water program manager, Kelsey Scarfone, will be joined by Anastasia Littner from the Canadian Environmental Law Association. So stay tuned for that final episode. Finally, just a special thanks to our speakers again, Allie Rougeot and Keith Brooks, for their expertise and insights. You can follow them on Twitter. Allie is at Allie Noor, which is her first name, and that's ALIENAOR and OR. And Keith Brooks at Keith D. Brooks on Twitter. Please keep in touch with us at Environmental Defense. You can follow us on Twitter or Facebook, or you can reach out to us on email. Thanks very much, and thanks for joining us. Have a great day.